Welcome back to AMC Presents. Today, our publisher William Ford will be talking with members of the Vega String Quartet, as well as Emory University professor of piano Will Ransom, who also serves as the artistic director of the Emory Chamber Music Society of Atlanta. The Vega String Quartet is Quartet-in-Residence at Emory University, inspiring new chamber music lovers through bold performances and community outreach. The New York Times praised their clean sound, while the LA Times called their debut triumphant. They've toured nationally and internationally, from Chicago and Nashville to Berlin, Vienna, and Amsterdam's Concertgebouw. They have collaborated with major artists including David Shifrin, Mark and Maggie O'Connor, Andres Cardenes, Eliot Fisk, Christopher O'Reilly, Ransom Wilson, and the Juilliard Quartet. They also teach young musicians, enrich classrooms, and reach thousands through school and youth programs. Internationally awarded, the quartet continues to perform, collaborate, and innovate at the highest level. The members of the quartet are Emily Daggett-Smith, violin; Jessica Shuang-Wu, violin; Joseph Skerrick, viola; Guang Wang, cello. Today's conversation includes Ms. Smith and Ms. Wu. Now, here's William and members of the Vega Quartet.
Maybe we could begin with Will talking a bit about the history of the Vega Quartet. Or what about the Vega Quartet?
So the Emory Chamber Music Society has been around. This is our 32nd season, and I started working on the idea of having a quartet-in-residence to support our activities. And I had heard the Vega originally when they were students, and then followed their career as they became professionals and moved to New York and started winning competitions and playing concerts. We originally had what we called a visiting residency program in 2003, and the Vega did a year-long project of 6 visits, 1 week each time, focused around the Beethoven quartet cycle. And while there, they gave classes at the university and played in kinds of venues and did all sorts of teaching as well. And it was incredibly successful, so I started trying to raise the money to make it happen. And in 2006, they moved from New York. They became our Quartet-in-Residence. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of their residency at Emory.
Is part of the cost of the Vega Quartet borne by Emory?
The residency itself is supported entirely by outside donations. And the response from the community has been nothing short of unbelievable. And we've received a number of endowment gifts so that the residency itself is endowed in perpetuity even after the Vega retire or leave or whatever happens. So almost 95% of funding for the entire Chamber Music Society is from private donations.
Do the members of the quartet become involved in training people at Emory?
Since we're at Emory University, a liberal arts college, not a conservatory or a school of music, my focus was on spreading music around the community as much as we possibly could, not on training pre-professional musicians. So we do have a wonderful department of music at Emory with something like 130 majors, but they're all double majors. They're wonderfully talented and in many cases very experienced young players who are not planning to go on professionally. They're going to be doctors and lawyers and businessmen and teachers and insurance salesmen. So the real focus of the residency is to take music into the classroom for students who have not been particularly exposed to great music and great players, certainly not in this way, up close and personal, and get them excited about it so that we'll create new generations of music lovers.
How did the relationship with Mark O'Connor come about?
Well, I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, and so have long been a fan of not just classical music, but great country music, great bluegrass. The old saying, there are only 2 kinds of music, good music and that other kind. And so I've always been amazed by the talent, the virtuosity, and the imagination of a lot of non-classical players as well. And Mark moved to Nashville when I was still there as a teenager, and he was mainly working in the studios at the time, but very quickly started collaborating with some of the wonderful classical musicians in town as well. So I knew about him, but our paths had never crossed until about 10 years ago when I finally reached out to him to see if he would perform at a festival I was running at the time in Alaska called Juneau Jazz and Classics. And he came out with his family band and just played one of the most extraordinary concerts I'd ever heard. It was all bluegrass. And I immediately knew that I wanted to work with this guy in any way I possibly could. So I came up with a couple of ideas, and one was this program that we're doing in New York called Beethoven and Bluegrass, because I love crossing genres and bringing different kinds of musics together, both from a musical standpoint, but also from an audience development standpoint, which as an artistic director of several festivals is really central to my purpose, and what I need to do is to develop audiences, bring people in. If you have a great string quartet with a great bluegrass player, hopefully you're going to draw from both of those audience who come in and experience the other genre that they may not know much about, get excited about it, and then start coming to those concerts as well. So I developed this concert, and Mark was a perfect choice for it because he is sort of the ultimate crossover artist, because not only is he a brilliant instrumentalist, not just fiddle, but also guitar, mandolin, sings. He can pretty much pick up any instrument and play it at a virtuoso level. But he also composes pieces like string quartets and symphonies and concerti, and is having wonderful success with that. And I knew he had written a couple of string quartets. So we put this program together. Boy, Jessica, do you remember the first time we did it? 5 or 6 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, first time was when actually Emily auditioned for the quartet, the very first time. We put the program in 3 days.
Oh,
It was after COVID. We were all wearing masks. It was 2020 in the fall.
Was that the first one?
Yeah.
Well, the program consists of a Beethoven string quartet as well as O'Connor's new string quartet number 2. What's the common theme between those two? Maybe Emily or Jessica might want to take a stab at that. Is there a common thread between those two pieces?
They're both difficult.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Anything else?
One is they're both very challenging. Every time we go back to either the Beethoven or the O'Connor, they're just layers of new things you can find. It's like you're peeling the onion. There's great stuff. It keeps coming. So it really challenges us. It's just a lot of fun to play both pieces. They're so different, but Mark is also a great composer. He, can really blend these two styles, classical and bluegrass, really kind of seamlessly together. So it's really fun. And of course, Beethoven. We have a slogan. We call it "In Beethoven We Trust." For the quartet.
It's the Beethoven 11th string quartet, right?
Yeah, Opus 95. Yeah, series.
Beethoven's string of string quartets, if you'll pardon the pun, has a unique position. Somebody want to talk about that?
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit. Beethoven, being the incredible innovator that he was writing in a classical style that sounds like in direct relationship to Mozart and Haydn. We divide Beethoven's music into 3 different periods because he was so innovative, as you know. So that's his early period and his middle period. He completely expanded the genre of the string quartet as he did with the symphony and all his other music. The string quartet becomes much longer, the range of expression and dynamic and becomes much greater, and he experiments with form a bit. But in general, the genre of the string quartet, or the pieces for string quartet that he writes, is Opus 59 string quartets, which are what we think of as his middle period string quartets, in addition to the Opus 74. It just becomes much grander. And then, of course, his late period is incredibly experimental. And his late quartets are some of my favorite music ever composed. He experiments with the form, harmony, everything. It just gets even more otherworldly as, of course, he's completely losing his hearing. And also the late quartets are quite long in general. The Opus 95, which is his 11th string quartet, is an interesting quartet because it comes right on the cusp of the middle and late period. And as opposed to the music on either end, it's very short. It's very compact. Each movement is only about 5 minutes long. And he kind of just jam packs as much expression and musical ideas into this very compact package as possible. So it's very unlike actually any other quartet that he wrote. And it's very interesting in that way.
He also apparently didn't want it performed publicly.
That's
He
right.
wanted it performed in small groups of musical elites.
I believe it's a small circle of connoisseurs, right?
And the O'Connor piece is how long?
We're only playing the two movements. They're about maybe 15.
I think about 20.
I think, yeah, closer to 20. Although it's only two movements of the quartet, very extensive and expansive. And Mark, both in his written out pieces and his improvising, is just remarkable. He can really just go on for such a long time and never lose interest.
Was it a 4-movement work in total?
It is. Yeah, and the reason we're not doing the whole thing is because it is too long for this program. The quartet itself could be half of a program.
Somebody want to talk about what a fiddler is as opposed to a violinist?
You know the difference between a violin and a fiddle?
No.
The violin has strings and the fiddle has strings.
It's funny because sometimes people will ask, "Oh, what is the difference between a violin and a fiddle?" And there's no difference. It's the same instrument, but it's just the style that you're playing. And people tend to call it a fiddle if they're playing folk music, and then violin for everything else.
Yeah.
I have to say also, my teacher in undergraduate Smirnoff, he would always call it the fiddle. Say, get out your fiddle.
Right.
Right.
The older generation teachers, they all follow the fiddle, And then there's some techniques, like for us, it's really interesting. We really have to learn. We still having played this piece so many times that I don't think we have really quite mastered it, at least not comfortably,
So Jessica's talking, I think, mainly about a specific technique, which is called chopping. It involves just the bow on the strings in a way so it just makes a percussive sound. So that's a specific technique that we all had to practice a lot and learn. And there's actually Maggie O'Connor has some videos on YouTube about how to do that, which we watched religiously. And it just practice a lot because it's a totally different way of using the bow than we're trained to do. But besides that, what's very remarkable about Mark's writing is that he found a way to notate how to sound like a fiddle player. So it's not like he gives us a general idea of the notes and then we have to figure out the style. He is completely notated all the slides, the duration of the slides, so many things about the style to play this music in. That's right on the page. And yes, it takes a lot of practicing, especially the rhythmic component is very complex in his piece, which is why it's one of the reasons it's so cool and so difficult. He found a way to put everything on the page in a remarkable way.
There's one thing really funny to me. I was doing some little concerts with other people. So I was just kind of playing a few lines of the bluegrass movement. And they all of a sudden, my friends like, "Oh, you fiddle?" You do everything he wrote down. You're like, "Oh, you sound like a fiddle player."
Emily, if I said play a fiddle tune right now, could you do that independent of what he wrote?
The main difference, I would say, is the element of improvisation, right? So as a fiddle player, you know the tunes and then you're able to riff off of them as you're playing. And that's something that we are not trained to do. I do have a friend who plays old time music and fiddles, and I've just kind of tried to play with him, but I'm not trained to do that. I would love to say that I could, but I'm not an improviser. So I would say in that way, I can't just pick up a tune and improvise on it in a musically satisfying way. But I think we are playing the fiddle as when we play this music, or if we play folk music that we've learned, which of course fiddle players have learned the songs in advance anyway.
It's a lot like jazz. in that most of the techniques are the same. There are a few that are different, but it's all about improvisation. And as Emily was saying, even bluegrass and jazz players practice a lot of their improvisation so that a lot of it is set. And if you hear Maggie and Mark play together, it's this unbelievable virtuosic playing, often either in unison or in harmony, that is incredibly carefully worked out.
When he's playing with you, is there a portion where he is improvising, or is everything written down?
We do close out the program, all six of us playing his very famous tune, Appalachia Waltz. And no, he's not improvising in that. Mark and I play the first violin part, Maggie and Jessica play the second violin part, and then Joe plays the viola part and Guang plays the cello part. That is a tune that, being a kind of crossing over into classical music, he had this very famous album in the 90s with Yo-Yo Ma and Edgar Meyer, and he wrote this tune for that album, and it's one of his most famous tunes that he's arranged for all different instruments. So he sent us this arrangement that we play with them.
If you said to Mark O'Connor, here's Dvorak's Romance, could he do that?
We've heard him play Bach all the time, actually.
Yeah, he can, but he would never play a concert of Beethoven sonatas or something. But he incorporates, especially Bach, into lots of his music, and then kind of makes it his own.
Can you specify how he might incorporate Bach into what he does?
Well, just in terms of his writing, there's lots of contrapuntal writing, lots of independent voices that work together, and the rhythmic interest as well. But I mean, he'll take a Bach partita and play the prelude, but change the rhythm and then maybe have some sections of improvisation in it, and then come back to the original Bach as well. We actually did a second program after this Beethoven and Bluegrass called Bach and Bluegrass, where we had the Vega members play some solo Bach, and Emily learned one of Mark's virtuosic etudes as well. And then on the second half, again, Mark and Maggie did their thing with some specific ones that reflected Bach's music.
How long did it take you to learn all of the fiddle techniques in the string quartet?
The first time we played this piece with Emily, we actually put this piece together in 3 days, I think. But I think before that, individually, we all really practiced.
The one technique that's really different is this bow technique I was talking about. And we did a class with him when I was at Emory for 3 days. And one of the things that he talked to us about was this chopping technique. Which we were not doing correctly at the beginning because we simply didn't know how to do it. We weren't trained in that. Mark and Maggie helped us with it then. And then we were watching the videos online, and they really helped us that day and kind of explained really how to do it, because it's similar to certain techniques you'll do in new music where you kind of just mute the strings, but it's not, and that's kind of how we were doing it initially, but it's not how you do it. And then after that, it took a while. It took months. And I remember actually getting some real arm pain from it because it's a technique that I wasn't used to doing. So it took a long time in order to be able to do it without contorting my arm in a kind of painful way.
Yeah, it's something, at least for me, every time when we picked up the piece again for a concert, you still have to kind of regroup and then kind of find it, recalibrate to find that specific technique. We always have to refresh our memory and then start slow just to kind of gel it together. It's very challenging. Yeah.
Is absolutely everything written down? And I assume it's traditional notation.
Yeah, the notation is all very traditional. I would say maybe 99% of things are written down. If you do everything that he wrote down, you will sound like what he wrote. But of course, there's the folk element in it. So certain things, like there's only certain way, even for classical really famous composers, that there's only a certain way to notate it. But the timing of you do it, he can show you this is a rhythm on the paper, but you can do a little slower than that, and then it will make it sound more folky. Those kind of things he tells us what to do, and then you feel like, okay, now I'm a fiddler.
But you find that in Dvorak and Chopin mazurka.
Exactly, right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, I was just
Beethoven
gonna
as well.
say,
Any folk, right.
anything we play, even no matter how specific the composer is, there's the element of the style that we're playing it that is hard to completely dictate on the page. So there is that element of making those stylistic choices. Like, it's impossible to notate. So
Well, given that there are four of you, each making stylistic choices, how do you decide who prevails?
Well, the correct answer is we, take turns to being team player and then be democratic.
Mm-hmm.
But the behind the door answer is we fight it out. Nicely.
it's that's the whole gig of doing a string quartet, is you have to find how to get on the same page and how to do things together. It's always unifying our voice. That's the tricky part, and that's the really interesting part of playing in a string quartet.
Probably one of the most rewarding also.
Yeah.
Because you certainly can't do that very much if you're in a symphony orchestra, for example. You give up that ability to have that kind of artistic influence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's like you said, that's probably one of the most rewarding, part of being in a string quartet. And then you have four creative mind people that you respect and like, and then think your idea hopefully is more similar, your style, and then if it's really conflicting, then you can't work with a quartet. You have to have some sort of mutual understanding to music. And then after that, I think it's all based on, you have to have an open mind and then just try different things. Like you said, you have absolute freedom to try different things.
But in the end, that's the greatest challenge of a quartet. It is one instrument, but it's got four independent players. That's why you see so many quartets that break up or change members all the time. Very difficult. But as you say, maybe the most rewarding. Beethoven said, I know no lovelier delight than the string quartet.
Have you ever run across a situation where you simply had to say, all right, I'll do it your way, in a nice way? Quit arguing about this, we'll do it your way.
We do it all the time.
Every day? Yeah.
Every day, yeah. And also that's the beauty of live performance. We play a lot of concerts. Today, let's say this concert, we try your way. And the next concert, let's try my way. It keeps the audience also really fresh. And, it's always different.
Did you ever run into a situation, not necessarily with the Vega, but with any string quartet you've worked on, where you made an agreement beforehand and a player went their own way nevertheless? Emily says no.
Not before, I don't think.
Not intentionally, at least.
Right.
The thing is, if somebody does that, the whole group is going to sound bad and they're going to sound bad. It's not like if somebody does that, they can get away with it and then they'll sound great doing their own thing, but the rest of us stumble. No, it doesn't work that way. That's the beauty of the string quartet, is that it has to work together. We have to find a way to compromise for the greater good of the performance in the string quartet. So that's the really challenging part, but the really rewarding part as well. But yeah, I cannot think of a time when somebody purposefully disregarded a decision that we had made about the music.
No, when we make a decision, you have to do it wholeheartedly, even if it's not how you initially felt.
Do either of you have a string quartet that you particularly admire?
For me, I really love the Amadeus Quartet. We had the privilege to study with them a few times. The history of the quartet and then their integrity to music, and then their friendship, it's just so special for me to have this opportunity to study with them and then to get to know not just music as human beings, what they do, and then the mutual respect for each other. It's really something very special to me. Yeah.
Emily, you?
Yeah, there's so many wonderful ones that I love. I love listening to. But I would have to say also the quartets that I have studied with have a real special place for me. The Juilliard Quartet, who I spent 6 years studying with, and then I studied with members of the Emerson Quartet as well. So, when you have that direct line of communication with a mentor or teacher who's in a group like that, it takes on a special meaning, and I really understand why they're making those decisions, the foundation beneath the sound that they achieve with those string quartets.
Will, how about you? Do you have any group that you particularly admire?
This is kind of a golden age for string quartets. Everybody's playing quartets now, and there are so many wonderful younger ones as well. But recently I got to work with the Takash Quartet and heard them live for the first time, and was really, really taken by their playing and their personalities. So they're currently way at the top of my list.
Anybody have any thoughts about AI in the classical music world?
It's interesting. We did a class on that because we do these classes at Emory presentations. I think one of them is like the student had questions. Can AI replace live music? But AI, there are certain things that I think it will make things easier for sure.
Emily?
It's very interesting. I mean, there's music that's composed by AI, right? And there's some very rudimentary music that's composed by AI, but there's some pretty sophisticated music that's composed by AI. But for that class, I think the interesting thing to me, just intuitively, why do you want to listen to something written by AI? If there's no soul behind it, I don't know, other than the just kind of novelty of it. But for that class, I remember reading about some interesting new music that's being composed using AI. Like a composer was writing a piece with a piano, like a player piano hooked up to an AI program, improvising in real time. And then the other musicians, there were live, real human musicians on stage reacting to that. So I think there's a lot of potential for interesting conversations about it. We did a reading with a composer of his new string quartet recently, and the string players you can do on the computer are quite advanced nowadays, but it's just not the same. And the composer will say, "Oh, it's just so amazing to hear real."
Will, any thoughts?
I'm kind of a Luddite. I don't even use iPads to read music anymore yet. I agree with Emily. It could be interesting, but I'm just such a fan of great masterpieces, of great music, and there's so much of it, and so much that doesn't get played, even of the great canon. We don't hear that much of it, and people who go to a couple of concerts a year certainly don't get to hear very much of the great masterpieces that are out there. So I don't have much to say about it.
So you're right, there's plenty of what we already have, but of course we're always adding new. So whether that's human or AI generated, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I don't have an answer for it. We just have about a minute left, and I really appreciate the time you spent